The cursor blinked on the monitor, a steady, rhythmic pulse over the job offer letter. Ethan read the salary figure 3 times. It felt like a gateway, a definitive key to a different life. He saw the potential in vivid detail, the engine roar of a new car, the view from a high-rise balcony, the life he had only watched from a distance. He accepted the offer without hesitation, but the reality of his new status arrived with a hollow thud. Within 6 months, the lifestyle creep took hold. Every salary increase was instantly consumed by mounting costs. He moved into a larger space, upgraded his daily habits, and watched the numbers in his bank account remain stubbornly static. He checked his phone late one evening, scrolling through his transaction history, searching for a surplus that simply did not exist. The figures were a blur of debits and recurring charges, a cycle that felt impossible to break. He had the income he once craved, yet he found himself standing in the exact same place financially, watching his potential vanish into the cost of maintaining an image. The dream of the life he wanted was slipping away, replaced by the relentless pressure of bills that grew in tandem with his paycheck. Ethan sat at his desk, the blue light of the screen reflecting off the empty glass before him. He pulled a worn, spine-cracked book from his shelf, the edges softened by years of neglect. He opened it to a marked page. The words hit him with a physical force. "Riches begin in the mind." He read the sentence twice, then closed the cover with a sharp snap that echoed in the quiet room. He stood up, pushed his chair back, and moved to his laptop. He didn't hesitate. He navigated to the banking portal, bypassed his usual account summary, and opened the transfer settings. His fingers moved across the keyboard with a new, mechanical rhythm. He set a fixed percentage to be stripped from every incoming paycheck the moment it cleared. He didn't wait for the end of the month. He didn't wait for a surplus that might never arrive. He hit confirm, watching the progress bar load, and finish. He had effectively cut his own spending power before he could even touch the money. He closed the browser, leaned back, and for the first time in months, the pressure in his chest eased. He had stopped waiting for his wealth to happen. He had built a machine to force it into existence. The first month passed in a blur of routine. Ethan sat down on a Tuesday night, his heart rate steady as he logged into his bank portal. He clicked on the savings account tab. The screen revealed a single, stark number, $500. He stared at it. It looked like a drop in an ocean he was nowhere near crossing. The distance between this small pile of money and his vision of financial independence felt like a physical weight pressing against his ribs. He turned to a browser tab he had kept open for days, a product page for a high-performance laptop. The specs were perfect. The temptation to click buy and justify it as a professional necessity surged through him. He hovered the cursor over the button. His finger tightened. He thought of the $500, the result of a month of strict discipline, and then looked at the cost of the machine. It would wipe out his progress in a single click. He exhaled a sharp, jagged breath, moved the mouse, and clicked cancel on the shopping cart. He closed the tab. The screen went dark, leaving him in the quiet of his room, the balance unchanged, the temptation suppressed, and the long road ahead finally beginning to take shape. 3 years passed. The world outside his window changed, but the rhythm of his life remained locked in a narrow, disciplined loop. Ethan watched from the periphery as his friends rotated through new cycles of consumption. They wore watches that caught the light, symbols of a liquidity he refused to emulate. They booked flights to distant cities, posting images of sand and sea that flickered briefly on his screen before he swiped them away. He kept his keys in the same bowl, turned the same ignition in his old car, and drove to the same office. On Friday nights, the phone would vibrate with invitations to dinner or weekend trips. He looked at the balance of his savings, then at the cost of a single night out, and he typed his regrets into the chat. He stayed inside. He cleared his desk, spread out dense technical manuals, and began to read. He tracked the syntax of complex code, building his own internal library of skills while the rest of his social circle traded time for temporary status. He felt the pull of the outside world, the urge to be seen and to participate, but he anchored himself to his chair. He had traded the immediate satisfaction of the present for the slow, quiet expansion of his future. He was not just saving money, he was erasing the habits that kept his peers in place. The graph on his monitor became his most demanding supervisor. Month after month, he logged in to track the line, expecting a spike that never came. It crawled upward, a jagged, agonizingly slow incline that barely seemed to move against the backdrop of his daily effort. He stared at the screen until his eyes burned, tracing the slope with his finger, searching for a sign of acceleration. Doubt settled in his chest, heavy and cold. Was he running a race that had no finish line? Was the discipline, the isolation, and the refusal of every luxury actually building something? Or was he just stalling his life for a number that would never arrive? He leaned back, the silence of the room amplifying the rhythm of his own breathing. He thought of his work. No single line of code ever built a functional application. A complex program was the result of thousands of tiny, precise, invisible functions working in tandem, each one seemingly insignificant on its own. He looked back at the graph. He stopped seeing a stagnant total and started seeing the accumulation of individual, disciplined choices. He closed his eyes, reset his posture, and turned his focus back to his current project. He would not look for a shortcut. He would look for the next line of code, the next small input, and the next day of consistency. Tuesday began with a frantic tremor across the financial markets. Red and green numbers flickered across the news feeds, a chaotic digital pulse that mirrored the anxiety in Ethan's gut. He sat at his desk, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. He had not checked the account in weeks, preferring the steady rhythm of his work to the nervous twitch of daily price action. He took a long, steadying breath, gripped the edge of his desk until his knuckles whitened, and clicked the banking portal. The page loaded with a slow, agonizing crawl. He stared at the center of the screen, waiting for the digits to resolve. He expected the familiar, incremental increase a few $100s, maybe 1,000. Instead, the screen refreshed. The number blinked into focus. $100,247. The room went unnaturally quiet. He did not shout. He did not jump from his chair. He simply leaned back, his spine pressing hard against the mesh of his seat. The breath he had been holding for 3 long years finally escaped his lungs in a single, sharp exhale. He looked at his hands, steady and calloused from years of typing, then back at the screen. The weight that had sat on his shoulders, the constant, low-level hum of doubt, vanished. He had crossed the threshold. The screen remained open, the numbers glowing soft white against the dark interface. Ethan watched the ticker, waiting for the reality to settle. It was not just the total that mattered. It was the velocity of the growth. He pulled up his monthly contribution history, a ledger of 3 years of sacrifice and precise, calculated deposits. Then he cross-referenced it with the interest accrued over the last 30 days. The interest was higher. The gap was small, barely a few dollars, but it was there. He tapped his finger against the desk, watching the realization take hold. The machine had finally started. For years, he had been the engine, forcing every dollar into the system with sheer willpower and relentless discipline. Now, the system was beginning to work for him. The financial weight that had defined his life shifted, moving from his own tired shoulders onto the foundation he had spent years constructing. He leaned forward, squinting at the math. The compound interest was no longer an abstract concept, it was a physical force. He had reached the point where his money was earning more than his labor could provide. He sat still, listening to the hum of his computer, recognizing the sound of a new phase in his life beginning to accelerate. A shadow fell across his keyboard. Ethan did not look up immediately, his eyes still tracing the lines of code on his secondary monitor. A young colleague stood by the desk, eyes wide with the frantic energy of someone chasing a market rumor. He leaned in, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Everyone is talking about your portfolio, Ethan. Give me the name. What is the secret stock?" Ethan paused. He reached out and clicked the mouse, dragging an empty text file into the center of his workspace. The blinking cursor was the only movement in the room. He did not look for a ticker symbol. He did not look for a chart. His fingers tapped keys with a slow, deliberate rhythm. He typed, small inputs, consistently applied. The colleague frowned, his brow furrowing as he stared at the words, waiting for a hidden meaning that never arrived. He looked like a man who had been offered water and found only sand. Ethan said nothing. He did not explain the years of denying himself, the nights spent staring at manuals, or the quiet resistance to every impulse to spend. He simply pointed to the screen. The text remained, stark and unyielding. The colleague walked away, still shaking his head at the simplicity of the answer. Ethan watched him go, then turned his chair back toward the monitor. He looked at the balance, the six-figure sum that had once been his only goal. It appeared smaller now, less significant than the habits that had brought it into existence. He thought back to the man he had been 3 years ago, restless, impulsive, constantly reaching for a lifestyle he could not afford. That man was gone, replaced by someone who found satisfaction in the routine rather than the reward. The bank account was merely a byproduct, a static record of a dynamic change. He touched his chin, feeling the weight of the years spent resisting the urge to quit. The real achievement was not the decimal point on the screen. It was the ability to sit in a quiet room, focused and unbothered. While the world chased volatility, he had learned to value his own patience more than any luxury item he once craved. The money could disappear, but the discipline he had forged was his permanently. He looked at his hands, steady on the desk, and recognized the true cost of his transformation. Ethan reached out and pressed the lid of his laptop downward. The soft click of the hinge marked the end of an era. He did not feel the need to check the numbers again. For years, he had pushed against the current, fighting every impulse to drift back toward his old, frantic life. Now, the resistance was gone. He stood up and walked to the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. He no longer felt like he was manually pulling his life forward. The machine he had built, the habits, the discipline, the quiet refusal to seek shortcuts was now doing the work for him. It was a self-sustaining force. He took a deep breath, feeling the stillness in his chest. The struggle had not ended. It had simply evolved into a natural state of being. He knew the path ahead would have its own challenges, but he was no longer running against the tide. He was riding it. He turned away from the window, satisfied with the quiet certainty that his life had finally gained its own permanent, unstoppable momentum. The transition was complete.